Thank you for joining us this evening for the first in our online lecture series. The Atelier at Flowerfield is a non-profit 501c3 art organisation. We offer a variety of art classes online and in studio in different mediums for all levels and ages. We also have an art gallery where we present exhibitions throughout the year. Our current one is the Pandemic Show. Paintings can be purchased through our online art store, accessed through our website, theatelier@flowerfield.org. Tonight, we welcome Antonio Masi, a nationally and internationally renowned artist who is president of the Watercolor Society. The goal of this demonstration is to show how attention to detail and unusual perspective make for moody works with strong textural quality. I shall now hand you over to Antonio Masi. Thank you.
Thank you. Tonight I'm going to do glazing and explain more what glazing is. I started this painting because of the time frame of the Queensboro Bridge. The way I start my colors, if you look at my palette, when I mix my colors, I don't put water down first, like you normally do in watercolor. I grab the painting, in this case, the paint, with my palette knife. And I never really use one color by itself. I'm always mixing at least two colors. In this case, I have the Payne's Gray and the Ultramarine. And then I add water. This way I can get to the value I want much faster, rather than just having water and then having to add and more add color. Now what I'm going to show you is that I take part of this color and I'm going to put it down here. Okay, I'm going to make this color a lighter value than this. There's a couple of ways to do that. I can add water, which I will. I also wanted to have a little body. Body means some white paint. This is what is referred to as the body paint. I use white in certain cases. So I have two values now. I have a dark and I have a light. In painting, you always really need three values. So I take part of the light value, I take part of the dark, I mix it together, and now I have three values. This was used by the early Renaissance artists to do their paintings. This is how they mix their colors to get their value range. If I mix the dark with the middle value, I'll have another value. So you can see how you can control your values very easily this way by mixing that way. One of the problems that artists usually have when you work in large like this is you don't mix enough paint to begin with. I mix my paints when I know I'm going to do a large painting in bowls like this. And I have my three values. What is glazing? Glazing is like a film, a colored film to put over the painting to modify the colors and pull them together. This is what I'm going to paint. How I created this light effect is with pure colors. And at some point, if we ever get into a workshop together, I will show you how to do that. This technique of using all the warm colors and using their value potential was demonstrated, I shouldn't say demonstrated, I just kind of learned from a guy by the name of Cézanne. I think you've heard of him. He was a pretty good painter. When I paint, I stand up because I find that I can paint with my arm. And the paintings are looser and bolder. Rather than sitting down, holding the brush, if you can see it, holding it up, hold it too much like a pencil. I hold my paint brushes back here. And this way I have to use my whole arm rather than with a pencil, we are using your wrist. I'll start. Now, the paint is rather thick. Strokes are made very quickly, but don't be fooled. They have a beginning and they have an end. The reason I need thick paint is because of the glaze that I'm going to use later. See, by again, using your arm, you're getting nice, beautiful, long, beautiful strips. And I paint, as you could probably figure it out, dark to light, which is the opposite that most watercolor artists teach.
Okay, so I have a
Go
question.
from light to dark.
Sorry. The
Excuse
question
me?
is saying, what white is it gouache?
It's called Chinese white, which is like a gouache, yes. But I only put that in the light value. White is a color to me. Black is a color to me. Again, this idea in watercolor that you should not use white paint, I don't believe in that. To me, I have one rule, which some of the people know what my rule is. My rule is I have no rules. Whatever works out and whatever the painting needs is what I use. By using the dark first, you're establishing the shadows, the shapes. I'm painting with a brush, not a pencil. And when you draw, you're drawing with a pencil and you're making a line. When you draw with a brush, you're making shapes. That is drawing, but you're drawing with shapes. It's a different point of view. You really won't appreciate this until I get to the glazing aspect. And also, I switch brushes a lot. When you take a new brush that's dry, wet it first, and then dry it up. When the dry brush is used at the very beginning, all it does is soak up the paint. But when you use a damp brush, it doesn't soak up the paint as much. So I want to practice the strokes. You can't get a stroke like that if you hold it too tight. There's an American painter. His name was, he passed away, Frank P. Carlson. He wrote a book called Outdoor Painting. And in his book, he says something that is rather interesting. Paint with conviction. Don't hesitate. Make that stroke look like it was meant to be. And you know, because of the strength of the stroke, people say, oh, yeah, that's the way it's supposed to be. Look, it has no hesitation and it's very strong. No one will know whether the stroke is really right or wrong because they're not going to look at your reference. All they're going to look is at your painting. I also paint through. I don't, oh, by the way, I forgot to tell you that in this particular painting, I used this masking fluid. Where it is. I used a masking fluid. I didn't want to hesitate to try to go around the little edges. I'm using the darkest of the value. It isn't black. This is a nice little brush. It's a calligraphy type brush. I get a lot of my brushes also at Home Depot. Most of the work that I do is very large, 40 by 60 or bigger. The biggest one I've done is 12 feet by 6 feet in watercolor. This is still the darkest value. Now I look at the picture and I try to remember what it is. I don't try to copy the photograph. I don't think painting is a matter of copying photographs. It's painting. As I get closer, by that I mean coming forward, because I usually start always with the background first and I work forward rather than working with the foreground first and then just putting things behind it. By working backwards from the back to the front, you are establishing that the things will be placed in the proper way, meaning it's not going to be just stuck on. It was meant to be on top of.
All right, sorry for the interruption, but there are a few people who do want to see your reference photo.
Oh, sure. The object of this is to get this effect, this evening photo feeling, not to copy the photograph, but to capture the feeling of it. Is that okay? Now, my middle value, this one, clean your brush. You go into that value. It's a little bit lighter, but it is still used as the dark. You could hardly tell the difference, probably. You won't be able to tell there, but in the painting, I see the difference. Because it isn't flat. The bridge goes back. This is up front and this goes way back. By the way, this is the Queensboro Bridge. At this point, I'll talk to you a little bit about bridges. You know, New York City, for 100 years approximately, from about 1883 to 1964, was the center of bridge building in the world. Harold Holzer, who was at one point a vice president of Metropolitan Museum, said that bridges are probably the most overlooked and underrated man-made masterpieces. They are so big, no one ever thinks of putting a frame on them or putting them in a museum. And yet, try to think of Manhattan, New York City, I should say, without the bridges. It would not be the same. In fact, Manhattan and New York City would not exist the way they are today. I'm going to get a little bit blending in there. The first bridge is the Brooklyn Bridge, which was built and finished in, well, it took 13 years, but it was finished in 1883. The man who designed that was John Roebling. Now, Roebling was good enough to get it approved. The price tag was supposedly $7 million to build. It took him about 5 years to get the approvals and get people to put up the money. Unfortunately, 2 weeks into the construction of the bridge, he had an accident and he died. He's the designer of the bridge. And the thing that made Roebling and his career was he invented something called the cable, a steel cable. There was no steel cables before that. And they used to use ropes or chains. Because of that invention, besides getting extremely rich, these bridges were able to be built, and they are suspension bridges because of that steel cable. Well, anyway, he passed away 2 weeks after his accident. I'm sorry, 4 weeks after his accident. And Colonel Washington Roebling, his son, took over. Now, his son was also an architect and was working with his father on the Brooklyn Bridge. So he was the logical choice to take over for his father. Well, as things happen in life, 2 years into the construction, he got sick and became paralyzed and couldn't work on the bridge anymore. In comes the heroine, Emily Roebling, his wife. She was no engineer. She became his eyes, his ears, his legs, his right arm. Every morning, she would go to the site and bring instructions to the workers what they should be doing. Because Washington Roebling was sitting in his apartment in Brooklyn Heights, overlooking the bridge with a pair of binoculars to see what was going on and to plan the next day's work. So Emily Roebling, for 13 years, she did this. It's amazing. Without her, I think the bridge would have never been built. And I keep telling some friends of mine who are writers, they should do a play on her. It would be a marvelous thing. But time will tell. Now, the Brooklyn Bridge took 13 years and $13 million to build. It was called the eighth wonder of the world. It was the tallest thing in New York. At that time, by the way, New York, Manhattan was a city, Brooklyn was a city, and Brooklyn had about 250,000 people living there, and Manhattan about 500,000, and they were using Brooklyn as like a place to sleep. And every day, the people would travel to Manhattan to work. But the only way they could get to Manhattan was with ferry. So the bridge became a necessity. Okay, let me just go here. The story about the Brooklyn Bridge is that one day, and it was, by the way, it was a very popular attraction. Every weekend, the families would take a stroll across the bridge, and you know, men would take their girlfriends. It was the eighth wonder of the world, so it had to be very popular. One day, or should I say one Sunday morning it was, that I hope you see, maybe you can see the value change, how this is a little bit lighter than that, because it's supposed to be lighter, but it's still in the shadow. But anyway, what happened one Sunday morning is a woman slipped, tripped on one of the steps. Another one yelled that the bridge is falling. There was a stampede. 12 people got killed and about 50 went to the hospital. After that, the newspapers started to say the bridge is falling down. It's not safe. And by the way, people used to pay a penny to walk across the bridge, 5 cents to bring your horse and cart across it or your buggy. So it was an investment that these people made into them. Now they're not making any money. Along comes P.T. Barnum. P.T. Barnum was the circus man. And, you know, he was an extremely terrific promoter. So he decided the only way to fix this was to bring his elephants and walk them across the bridge. He took his 21 elephants from the circus. See how I'm making the transition? So the light and the color, this in a way, as I'm doing now, is a minor glaze. But anyway, he took his elephants and he walked them across the bridge, and he included his prized possession, Jumbo, a 7-ton elephant. And after bringing them back and forth, he declares the bridge safe. and he made his he made his big splash. Now, within 10 years, the Brooklyn Bridge was so crowded that literally in the mornings, people would almost have fights to get across it to get to work. They realized, and it was about 1890 that Manhattan and Brooklyn joined and became a city. Because Brooklyn was a bedroom community. So the next bridge that was built was the Williamsburg Bridge, which I refer to as the Willie B. That opened in 1903. That bridge is like an erector set. I don't know if you're familiar with an erector set is. When I was a kid, it was just a metal toy that you construct things. The engineer on that bridge was Buck. And Buck wanted to make it cheap, make it fast, because at that time, New York City was run by politicians, Tammany Hall politicians. So they all made money on these bridges with graft and whatnot. And Buck took the idea of designing the bridge from the Eiffel Tower. If you look at this bridge, the Williamsburg, and you look at the Eiffel Tower, you see some relationships. See, the bridge is coming along. By painting the shadows first, you'll get the solidity of a painting. And by varying the values of the shadows in a progression from, say, dark to light, you get this movement. It could be the other way around. You can make it dark at the beginning and lighter at the back. But that's up to you, your choice. I decided to make the background darker and come more forward. And then I start fading the color into the, I hope that comes across. I've never, by the way, tried to do a lecture and a painting at the same time. It's kind of interesting. But anyway, the Williamsburg Bridge.
All right, sorry for the interruption.
Yep.
But question, did you draw in the detail in the red area using a ruler?
No, I don't use rulers. One of the things about my bridges is that I don't use rulers because I don't want any mechanical looking thing. If you look at my artwork, you go on my website, you can see my bridges. They look very solid, and they are solid, but there were no rulers used. That's when they become a piece of art. Rather than using a ruler, it is a rendering. See, there's a tremendous difference between technical proficiency and art. You have to be technically proficient first, then you become the artist, which is another whole story. By that, I mean, I shouldn't just skip over that lightly. I apologize. You have to consider that I like Mozart. If I go to Carnegie Hall to listen to a Mozart concert that I happen to like, I expect the musician to be a good musician, to be able to play the instrument well, without any problems. If he's not a good musician, he's going to butcher the song. So in art, I say to you, you must learn your medium, your craft. You have to learn how to paint so that then you can express what you want. You cannot say something when you don't know the words. So learn your craft. Once you learn your craft, I don't have to think of what brush to pick up, what stroke to make. It's become an instinct to me now because I've done this so over and over again. And by the way, I paint a minimum of 2 hours a day. Every day you must paint, just like a musician practices the piano every day. If you don't, you're going to lose it. But anyway, getting back to the bridge, Buck designed it, and he was appointed by a politician mayor from Tammany Hall. And when a new mayor was elected, Buck was replaced by another man named Gustav Lindenthal. You'll hear his name again later. He saw the bridge and he said, "My God, this is the ugliest thing I have ever seen." It was just because, you know, they were being paid, the construction workers and the bridge builders, by the amount of steel they used. So the more they put on, the more money they made. Well, anyway, the bridge got finished, and it was so ugly that the chief engineer, Lindenthal, refused to have his name put on the bridge. With like anything else in New York, we had the great immigration that came to America, and they came to New York, basically, Ellis Island. We had over 13 million people come through Ellis Island. The city was growing so fast that the bridge now was also jam-packed. They needed another bridge. The third bridge was the Manhattan Bridge. At that point, the designer for that was a man by the name of Leon Moiseev. Moiseev was a Columbia University graduate, a brilliant mathematician. And he had this theory called the deflection theory. See, as I work, I look at the picture, even though I have a drawing here, I don't follow the drawing. I redraw with the brush. It's a constantly refining. I mean, the great painters, Velázquez, Rembrandt, etc., they didn't do a drawing and then fill it in. If you do a drawing and you just fill it in, okay, the Renaissance did that. The Renaissance artists, that's how they did it. But they were after a different effect. But anyway, Moiseev had this theory called the deflection theory, which means that you can build the bridge lighter by using less steel. Well, he did use less steel, and he also made a few fundamental mistakes. The bridge was built for subways, primarily subways. And he put the subway cars on the outside of the bridge, on the outside lanes, which today are the pedestrian walks. Oh, by the way, speaking of pedestrian walks, the most beautiful views of New York, Manhattan, you can get is from the Brooklyn Bridge. It has a pedestrian walk. It was designed for people to walk on. Anyway, within a few years, that bridge was falling apart because the stress on the bridge by the trains rolling across it was so great that the bridge, are you ready for this one? When the trains will go over the bridge, the subway cars, and they're, 8 or 10 cars with many thousands of tons with the pedestrian, the bridge would drop 8 feet. And then when it came to all on the other side, the bridge would go back up again. That's how poorly it was designed. And it was very dangerous. It took $830 million to fix that problem. They moved the train tracks to the middle of the bridge so you don't have that tension and that pressure on the outside. $830 million. And the bridge only cost about $13 million to build. Something's wrong there. Anyway, this was Leon Moiseff. Now he's going to be he became very famous, but unfortunately he became famous for the wrong thing. He built a bridge in Tacoma, Washington. That bridge, the Tacoma Narrows Bridge in Washington, using the same theory, but this time he even went further. He made it even thinner. Within 1 year, that bridge was blown down by the wind in a 47-mile-an-hour wind. And that particular disaster was called Galloping Gertie. You can see that the bridge actually swaying in the wind and being blown apart by the wind. There was a man with a camera who took pictures of that. And they still use that video, not video, that film today in engineering classes on this, what happens when it's poorly designed. His career was finished after that, and within 3 years he died. The Manhattan Bridge is probably one of the ugliest bridges you can walk across, and yet at nighttime, when the darkness comes upon it, it looks like a beautiful bridge. I like it because I get the most beautiful views of the Brooklyn Bridge when I walk across it. And that's another thing about my work. I go and I meet the bridges. This is a problem, right? No, not really. I'll make it a cable. In watercolor, one of the things you have to be aware of, it has a mind of its own, watercolor. See, now it becomes part of the picture. You have to be ready for things to happen in watercolor. And when something happens, try not to fight it, try to incorporate it into your work so that it doesn't look like you're fighting it. Remember, the purpose of this demonstration is glazing. I've done everything but that, with the exception of a little area there. Glazing is such a beautiful thing, beautiful. The great Venetian painters, especially Titian, was the master of glazes. One day, the story goes that one of Titian's students says, Master, how many glazes should I use on this painting? And Titian replied, as many as it needs. I've done paintings where I've used 49 glazes. And I'll try to explain that a little more when I get into the glazing more. You see, by painting the darks first, I've established a solidity, the form. And if I refer to, the way I can describe this to you is in building a house, if your foundation in the house, of the house, isn't solid, no matter how many walls you put up and how fancy the windows are, that house is going to fall. These dark shadows, or dark values, is my foundation for my painting. This also gives the painting drama, the eye-catching appeal, because it's very strong. The reasons I talking a little bit about this is because some people ask me, well, they know that I'm the president of the American Watercolor Society. They ask me, well, what do you look for in a painting when you're judging a show? Well, first of all, the drama of the painting is so important, or it catches your eye. And this is true of anything. You've had this experience in meeting people. Who would catch your eye first when you have half dozen people in front of you? The one that has the most interesting look, the one who stands out. So drama is very important, and you get drama by contrast. Most of my work is a matter of contrast. Color, value, shapes, etc. This particular painting has color as part of it, and also has the value. Okay. So anyway, getting back to judging art shows. The use of this contrast catches your eye, and the judges automatically, their eye is drawn to it. It's just natural. So one of the things I suggest to people is make sure you painting it, has some drama in it. I don't know if you can see the drama in this. What I'm trying to do is to capture this contrast, this feeling. When I paint a feeling that I'm after. I'm not painting the photograph. People have said to me many times, oh, look at that painting. It's so real, looks just like a photograph. And I am so tempted to say to them, then why do we need your painting? We have the photograph. There is something you can learn by being able to copy the photograph accurately. You're learning a skill. And I've done that. Believe me, I've done very renderings. I refer to that as rendering. The best way I can tell you my first experience that I learned the difference between a rendering and a painting was when I was at The Hague, not The Hague, I'm sorry, when I was in Holland, and I went to the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam, because one of the things on my bucket list was Rembrandt's Night Watch. And to be able to see that painting live is utterly amazing. The people are walking out of the painting. It's such a lively feeling. And by the way, that was a reject. They didn't accept this painting. They thought it was bad for many reasons. But anyway, let me get back to the Manhattan Bridge, which we all know took $830 million to repair. The next one was the Queensboro Bridge, which also opened up in 1909. Now, Queens was a farmland, and some very clever and forward-thinking businessman said, look, Queens is going to be the next area that's going to be developed. We've got to get into that and get the people over there. And the only way they can do that was by building a bridge. Couldn't take the ferry. There was no ferry up in that area. So they built a bridge, and that's the only bridge in New York that's not a suspension bridge. That's a cantilever bridge. By cantilever bridge, I mean that just think of two diving boards. Two diving boards opposite each other and meeting in the middle. They're held in place by the pillars, the towers, whereas the suspension bridges are held up by those cables, those huge cables you see coming down, and the wires that come down to hold the runway of the bridge are the suspenders. Oh, I must tell you one last thing about the Brooklyn Bridge, because I think it's such a fascinating story. You know, the Brooklyn Bridge, when it was first built, was there were people who had mental problems, let's put it that way. They would jump off the bridge to commit suicide. Well, the only person that we know that survived the Brooklyn Bridge jumping off was a woman by the name of Clara MacArthur. She was a very smart woman. What she did was she put 20 pounds of sand in her socks. So when she hit the water, she went in feet first. And that enabled her to survive. Oops. I need to get the color in here to grade and blend. Anyway, she survived it. Lucky her. I'm just glazing some of the parts. I don't know if you can see that, the difference between that and that, this and that. Now I'm beginning to get a three-dimensional quality to the bridge. One thing I must say to you about painting is when you paint, have a clear picture of what you want to do. Don't just start and think that it'll happen by itself. No, it's like going on a trip and you don't know where you're going. And then you don't know when you've arrived because you don't know where you're going. So I say to you, in painting, it's no different than in life. Have an idea of where you want to go, so that when you get there, you have arrived. You don't bake a cake without having a recipe. You shouldn't paint without knowing what you're doing. Now you may realize that I'm using a lot of different brushes. Well, that's on purpose, because I say, and I believe, and I'm not the only one who thinks this, that every brush has its own voice. What do I mean by that? I'm saying that this particular brush will give me a certain stroke. This particular brush will give me a different stroke. Every brush has a purpose and a reason for, for existing. And you should utilize that and take advantage of it. It gives your work more variety, more interest. And I mean, I've also known artists who are very proud to say, and I did this painting with one brush. Okay, nothing wrong with that. I mean, I'm happy for them.
Okay, so we have a question.
Yes.
How long before the demo did you do the red glow of the bridge?
I had to do that. It took about 2.5 hours to do. And I did that yesterday because I wanted to dry. I could not, within the time frame we have, to do this and what I'm going to do with the glazing altogether. My paintings usually take me about 60 hours to do. And I'm talking about my big paintings. I'm not a fast painter. I am I plan my paintings. And
okay, there's also another
yes,
that question. Are you wetting the paper at the bottom before you add the glaze?
what I'm trying to do at the bottom right now is bring the darkness and the lightness together to see to sort of fade this into each other. Okay, let me go to the next one. So far, I've used about 2, 4, 6, 8, 9 brushes. I use a lot of brushes. Okay, here we go. This is the third value. It's a dark value, as you can see here, because they are close in value in my picture. But I pushed the value. So they're much closer in my photograph. But to get more of a feeling of the dimension of the structure, I pushed my values. By that I mean, I made one a little bit darker and the other one a little bit lighter to pull them apart a little bit more to give me more contrast. I think you should push your values so that you get the nice contrast. In Asian art, they call that the yang and the yin. Black and white, the contrast, opposites. Learn about every culture. Okay. Now, do you see the three-dimensionality of the bridge, which you don't have in the photograph? It's flat.
So
I go and walk across the bridges. I do not and I do take photographs, yes, and I do make sketches on location, yes. But I walk across these bridges. I know what they are. I felt the steel structure. I have sensed the vibration of the bridge.
okay, so Antonio?
Yes.
All right, so we have a couple questions.
Yes.
All right, so the first one is, so the American Watercolor Society accepts opaque watercolors. Like the Chinese white?
Yes, we accept any water-based media, which is acrylics, designer's colors, egg tempera, but they must be done on paper. In fact, there's the exhibition now, the show to come. You can enter the show if you wish. You go online to the American Watercolor Society, and you can get the application on how to enter, and it has all the details there.
Okay.
Now, getting back to the bridges, the Queensboro Bridge was built by, again, this time there was a man before Lindenthal, and the other man's name, the engineer, was also Buck, but a different Buck. And so because Lindenthal had the good political connection, he was made in charge of the Queensboro Bridge. And because the Queensboro Bridge is a cantilever bridge made out of steel, and the builder was making money, excuse me for 1 second, because it's still a little wet. I use a hairdryer. I use my hairdryer a lot because working so large, what's the word? I'm impatient.
Okay. So
But
we have
anyway,
a question.
yes, go ahead.
Are you painting dry into dry?
Yes, dry over dry. I rarely ever paint on a wet surface. I wet it after I do the painting. Okay, I'll show you what I mean. Again, my only rule is simple. I don't have rules. Now, in practicing a stroke like this, it's like a golfer or the bat or baseball. You know, you practice the stroke, you see the line, you get the feeling, and then you do it. Don't go this way, because then you get a hesitant stroke, a stroke that doesn't look as good as it should. And with Kleenex tissues, you can vary that line a little bit to get, you see the light area here and it's darker there, or you vary it. You don't have to go very slowly and keep doing this, keep doing that. Try to think outside the paint box. Paint with your brain and your heart. I don't know if you see the difference so far between my painting and the photograph. I have more dimension, more life in it. Photograph is flat, and it wasn't meant to be anything but what it is. Again. And then you put the stroke in. Everything I'm doing here tonight is nothing that you have never heard before. The only difference between what you do sometimes, not all of you, of course not, and what I do is I don't hesitate. I make a bold statement, could be completely wrong, my bold statement, but because it is done with conviction and authority, it sounds right. This is what I learned from Carlson. Carlson, again, is a wonderful was a wonderful American painter. He wrote a book called Outdoor Painting by Carlson. But if you ever get a hold of it, I advise you to read it. I think I've read that book 7 times, and I still read it. Because every time I read it, I get another sense of what he's talking about. Okay, let me go on a little more.
What paper do you prefer?
I prefer Arches 300-pound watercolor. The reason 300-pound is because it doesn't buckle as easily as the 140. And also, I beat my paper up a lot. I mean, I'll go in with a razor blade. I'll go in, and I've used Clorox to take paint out, sandpaper, you name it, and I've probably have done it at some point in my life. I don't see any reason to not do something when it strikes your fancy. Let me put it another way. I'm painting, and all at once something flies into your head, and you've all experienced that. And you say, nah, not right. I think you're doing yourself a disservice. By the way, I have to keep my paints. I put out all my paints, even though I don't use 60% of them, but they're all there in case I need them. Anyway,
Okay,
when
sorry.
an idea comes to you,
Another question. I'm
yes,
sorry. Is it cold press or hot press paper?
this is cold press. Cold press. Well, when you get an inspiration, which is what I refer to when these thoughts come in. And I'll be honest with you, many times they're disasters. I get bad results from it. I'm not going to say it all works out, but one in two of them, when they come in, I'll give an example of that. It's absolutely a stroke of genius then when it comes like that. In other words, you know those cables that come down on the bridge, these suspender cables that drop down? And on the big 40 by 60 painting, those are a lot of cables to draw and paint. It all came to me, I don't know why, but it just flew into my head. Why don't I use an eyedropper? Because I work on a wall, upright. I work flat on the wall and everything drips down. So I filled the eyedropper and I put it at the top of the cable. I squeezed the paint down and it came down like a cable. Gravity did the work for me. Just an idea that flew into my head as I was doing it. That's what I'm saying. When something flies into your head, don't dismiss it. You don't know. Because that's what, creativity is. It's just that thing that happens.
Okay, so do you paint plein air?
Yes, I do that a lot, plein air painting. In fact, the whole summer I spend out in Montauk, where I go for the summer and I do plein air painting. I also go to Arizona. I used to go to Arizona and teach workshop there at the Scottsdale Art School. Yes, and I was supposed to go to Sicily and do a plein air this last year, but Mr. Corona prevented that from going. I'm supposedly going to go next year again, but we'll see what happens. Yes, I do plein air painting, and I don't do it any different than I do it now. I am me. No matter what medium I use, I paint, I draw, and I express myself as I am. I do not want to be someone else. I have learned from other people. I've learned tremendous amount of things from other people, other artists. But I'm not them. and they are not me. I have never known anyone to copy another artist and become famous.
Okay, so
You learn from everybody.
we have a question about the Arches paper. So the Arches paper is 140 on the roll. Your large paintings 40 by 60 and up. Where do you get
They're 300 pounds.
that size, on a roll or a flat?
I buy them from Jerry's Autorama, but unfortunately, you can't buy a single sheet. You have to buy a skid. But then, you know, you get like 10 or 30 sheets on a skid. Each sheet cost about $80. And if you know what I mean by a skid, it's on these wooden pallets. I cannot pick up more than 2 or 3 sheets at a time. The paper is so heavy. But I buy the stuff and it lasts me a year or two. And it comes in on these tailgate trucks. And you have to tell them that you want a tailgate truck, not a flatbed truck. Some of you know what I'm referring to. See what I'm doing now? I'm just giving it a little bit of atmosphere, which this does not have. I don't know if you can see that there's a lot of activity going on, and yet I'm still trying to capture the feeling of what I have. I'm painting what I remember of the bridge when I was there and when I took this picture. I'm not painting this picture. I remember and paint that. That is what painting to me is. Anyway, getting back to the Queensboro Bridge, which opened in 1901, the next great bridge that was opened up is the George Washington Bridge, which opened in 1931. It was built during the Depression. This bridge was designed by an engineer named Atma Aman, who later on built 5 bridges in New York City. No one's ever heard of this man. He was a completely total genius. Everybody loved working with him because he took no credit. The politicians loved him because the bridge was finished. They got the credit. So anyway, Aman designed the George Washington Bridge, and they ran out of money because the towers of the bridge, if you remember, they just steel. They were supposed to have a stone facing like the Brooklyn Bridge. Because they ran out of money, they didn't do that. And it turned out to be a beautiful thing. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with the architect Corbusier, who was a part of the Bauhaus movement. And when he came to New York and he saw the George Washington Bridge, he said that it's the most beautiful bridge in the world. That bridge has set the standards for all of the future bridges. And the painter, Marcel Duchamp, who did the new Descending Staircase, among other things, said that there are 2 things that America has given the world. And that is the toilets and bridges. The bridges of New York for almost 100 years were the models for every other part of the world. And all these bridges, by the way, were designed and built by immigrants. Take it for what it's worth.
Also, we have a question.
Yes.
What brand of watercolors do you prefer? Your red is quite powerful.
Okay, I am partial to Grumbacher. Not Grumbacher, I'm sorry, Winsor & Newton. Why? Because they support the American Watercolor Society. They're one of we've been with them since 1909. But believe me, the other paints are just as good. The Schmidt's painting are beautiful. Rembrandt paints are wonderful. They're all on the same caliber. So, but the only thing I say to you, if you like one brand, for example, I like the Winsor & Newton Ultramarine Blue. The same color, say an American Journey by Cheap Joe, same ultramarine blue, doesn't look the same. So from manufacturer to manufacturer, the names don't really mean anything because they have their own formulas. So try to be consistent with a brand so that when you pick up an ultramarine blue, you know which ultramarine blue and what you're going to get with it. And when you mix it with other colors. But like I said, I'm only prejudiced towards Winsor & Newton because they've been a good sponsor to AWS. But the other brands are just as good. I need to use the hairdryer, so I want to try to get the painting at this stage as bone dry as I possibly can before I put a glaze on it and start glazing. Glaze you must do over completely dry painting. And by the way you can tell whether the painting is completely dry is to use your knuckles. Use your knuckle. Touch the paper with your knuckle. If you feel a dampness, it means you have arthritis. No, I'm sorry. It means the painting's still wet. But that's what arthritis is dampness in the joints. Anyway, the George Washington Bridge, while this dries, I'll tell a little story about the George Washington Bridge. It's about the most used bridge in the world. It has 14 lanes, 8 lanes above, on the upper level and 6 lanes below the level. Just to give you a kind of a visual idea how big the bridge is from tower to tower. Visualize Fifth Avenue from 57th Street all the way down to 42nd Street. Okay? Take that width of the street from building to building and double that. So far with me? Take that and lift it 6 stories high and fill it with cars and trucks. And that's how big that bridge is. The towers are over 700 feet tall. The towers have as much steel or maybe even more than the Empire State Building. It is truly a marvelous bridge when it was first built, and it still looks beautiful. Okay.
All right.
Next bridge that came to being was the Triborough. I'm going to get to glazing. Well, I talk about that a little bit about that.
All right, Antonio,
Yes.
you have a question.
Yes.
Okay, so when you paint plein air, how do you work the light change? How do you work
From dark to light?
the light change since the paintings have such a dramatic light in a single moment?
Okay. I do what I call a quick value study, which I cannot show you what I mean, but I have 3 values. And I do a very quick study in 3 values. I know that where all the darks are, I know where all the lights are, and I know where the middle values are. So within 2 hours, the sun will be completely different. And I always refer back to my thumbnail sketch and most important of all, my memory. You see, One of the things I used to be taught in the art academies in Europe was memory painting, which we don't do. For example, Carlson, well, Carlson was one of them, is that you go outdoors and you look at a landscape, a particular aspect for 3 hours. Don't draw anything, don't paint anything. You sit, stare, and try to remember it for 3 hours. Next day, you go home, or you go next day when you are home, you do a painting of what you remember. Why is that so important? Because when you can train yourself to paint from memory, you will remember only the essential things that make that scene what it is. You won't have to worry about the little chipmunk who runs around or the little squirrel. You only will remember the essentials. So when I paint, if you noticed, I rarely look at the painting, the photograph. I paint from what I remember. Then the painting becomes me, and I am putting myself in the painting. Memory drawing and memory painting is an exercise for the brain. And that is very important, but we don't teach that anymore. I hope I answered about your. Now, a glaze, there are two things. A glaze is transparent, and then there is another thing called a scumble, which is opaque, which is more for oil painters. A glaze is made up primarily of water. By the way, I use my spray bottles. I don't know if you can see that. Yeah, I think you can if you focus on the palette. And I'm going to use my colors. Okay, this is called Midnight Blue by Cheap Joe. And again, I never use one color by itself. I always mix two colors together, minimum, usually 3. Why do I do that? Well, because the painting is not going to look raw, like a painting by numbers, the way it came out of the tube. It's something that, I don't know, I just, on my own, do. I don't know if you can see what I'm doing. And I'm using this brush. It's called a hockey brush, H-A-K-E.
So how
And
long?
there is a lot of things I can say, but we don't have all that time. So I'm just trying to pick up the highlights. So after the after the George Washington Bridge, the Triborough was built. Again, it was designed by Amman. The Triborough is really a series of bridges and roadways. It's 22 miles long. It connects Manhattan, Queens, and the Bronx. Now, I don't know whether this is the right color I want, but what I have here, and we come back here, is my test strip of the colors when I mixed them before. I keep these test strips, and this paper is the same as the paper that I'm painting on. So I take the wash that I just created and I pull it over. I don't know if you didn't see that. I apologize. See, I just pulled it over to see how it covers that.
All right, Antonio, we have a question. How long have you been painting bridges? And is there a bridge
I know that watercolor dries lighter. The light colors dry lighter, the dark colors dry darker. And by doing this, I can see the value if that's what I want. But I'm going to use 2 glazes on it. And in glazing,
All right, Antonio,
yes,
we have questions coming through.
yeah.
Okay, so how long have you been painting bridges? And is there a bridge you are looking forward to painting?
I started painting my first bridge in 2006. I'm an immigrant. I came to America in 1947. And my grandfather worked on this bridge that I'm doing a painting of. And one of the days when I was painting, I says, you know, I want to paint the Queensboro Bridge in honor of my grandfather. And I painted the bridge, and my wife, Liz, who, by the way, is a marvelous painter, said, why don't you enter that in the show? I said, ah, forget about it. Well, she entered it for me in one of the art magazine contests, got first prize. And I said, wow, maybe I should do a few more. So after that, I started painting all the bridges in New York. I made that as a kind of a project. And then Fordham and Oxford Press picked up and asked to do a book on it. That's how it started. It was just a way to say, honor my grandfather who worked on the bridge for 9 years as a laborer. Okay, now, in using, if you can focus on the palette when my paint is, when I hold a brush, again, I hold it back here at the end. In glazing, you do not push down on the brush. You drag it across very lightly. And you do not go back. You do not go back to go over the same area twice.
Okay, so there was another question. What was the third part of the glaze?
The third part? What do you mean by the third part?
I'm not sure. That's what came through.
I'm not sure what the question is about the third part. Maybe they could rephrase it so I could get a better feeling. So I have 2 brushes. I'm painting with 2 hands. I need to get, I don't want to completely cover that beautiful glow.
Do you use salt or alcohol in your painting?
Do I use alcohol?
Or salt?
No. No. No, I don't.
Okay, so going back to the question with the glaze,
Yes.
what is the glaze made of?
Water, midnight blue, and ultramarine blue. In this case, that's what I used. Now, things happened here, and you're tempted to go and touch it up. Don't touch it. You do, you're going to ruin it. This is the first glaze. And I'm trying to sort of time ourselves so that by 9 o'clock, I'll get at least 2 glazes on it. I don't know if you can see this now, that the edges of the paint was softened by the glaze. Think of a glaze as atmosphere, which envelops and surrounds everything. That's what the glaze is supposed to do, pull everything together. But just getting back to the bridges, I do a 45-minute to an hour lecture on just bridges with slides, a PowerPoint presentation, which is more detailed than ideas that, or thoughts I'm throwing at you now. The Queensboro Bridge is, as I said, 22 miles, and that is nothing more than a whole bunch of ramps, bridges, all put together. The next bridge was the Whitestone, the Bronx Whitestone. That opened in 1939, one day before the World's Fair. It's not by accident, by the way. Robin Moses, who was in charge of the World's Fair, was also in charge of having this bridge built. He wanted to get people to come to the the Whitestone Bridge. The Whitestone Bridge to me is like the Rodney Dangerfield of bridges. It gets no respect. Never hear of anyone wanting to jump off a Whitestone Bridge. They'll go either to George Washington or the Brooklyn Bridge, but nobody cares about the Whitestone. It's, to me, the Rodney Dangerfield of bridges. Let me set this up a little bit for you so you can get a better idea of what the glazes did. I have another one to put on. Can you see that better? See how the glow comes across now with the glaze that pulls all the background together and makes this pop out? It's a contrast of warm and cool, light and dark, large background, small focus point. Oppositions in the painting are extremely important. Look at the great masters where the light is just glowing, especially Rembrandt, by the way. This has to dry and then I have to give it another one. In glazing, you use thin, transparent washes. Don't think one heavy wash is going to do it. The one heavy wash, if you use that, all it's going to do is flatten it. But by building up glaze after glaze on top of each other, and each one of them has to be dry, you're building a transparency, a thinness, and yet at the same time a richness, which you cannot get with just one glaze. That's why I said I've used 49 on one painting. If you remember how I did this with a calligraphy brush, and now because I put the glaze on it, the glaze softened the paint, fused it with the background, the sky, and it still has the shape of what I was doing, but now it gives you the feeling it's at nighttime and the environment, in this case, the nighttime has overtaken it and subdued it. And how, when I changed the value, if you remember, I had 3 values. I used the lighter value here. I knew I wanted that, by the way. So that's why I did the dark back here. So you get this transition going from light to dark. These, again, plan, have a vision on your work. Have a plan. Choose a goal, what it's supposed to look like. And then make sure you wait in between each layer of paint, especially in watercolor. You have to wait. Otherwise, it becomes a mess. Patience, thoughtfulness, extremely important in watercolor. Now, watercolor is referred to, no, I'm not trying to brag, but watercolor is referred to as a master's medium. By that I mean, and this comes from oil painters, by the way. Oil painters are amazed what a watercolor artist can do. Because in oil paint, you put the paint down, it stays there. It doesn't move. You can scrape it off, go again. In watercolor, as you noticed before, I had this drip here. It just has its own mind. I don't fight watercolor. I go with the watercolor. I listen to what it wants to say, and I try to become part of the message. So that's what I say about watercolor. You have to be careful. And yet, I mean, I have some artist friends who do these fantastic super realism renderings of glass, fruits, and cherries, and brocades, and they're beautiful. My opinion, I think they are terrific craftsmen, but they're not artists because they have not put themselves into their painting. And that's what artist to me is, an expression of myself and how I feel and see things. I'm not there to render it. I'll get a Polaroid or a Polaroid. You can see how old I am. I'll get a digital camera nowadays. Now, the next glaze, I'm not going to do it all over. I'm going to select areas to glaze. And I'm going to turn it upside down because I want the glaze to get darker down here. You know, watercolor is pulled by gravity. I want gravity to work with me. And when I put a glaze up here, but the next glaze I start, I'm going to start it down here. So this area up here is going to be lighter than this area down here as a glaze. This will have 2 layers of air. This is going to have only 1 layer of air. So you can see now what I'm going to do. I'm going to play with the background. I'm going to push and pull the background. Two hands. I used to paint and draw 2 hands once in my life. I did go to art school. I went to the High School of Art and Design, New York, in the 50s, which was a vocational art school. They taught, and I went there to learn art. I went to a vocational school to learn art. I got out of high school, I was able to get a job as an artist. Those are the days that were different than today. You see what's happening now? It's darker down here and it's lighter up there. So when I turn it upside down, you're going to see darker up above and it's going to get lighter as it is. That is because the sky is a dome. It's a curved dome. The darkest part of the dome is right above us. The lightest part of the dome is the furthest away from us. You'll see that especially in outdoor painting. Again, It has to dry. You have to have patience. Usually at this point, I'll go upstairs and get a cup of coffee, or I'll get an apple, or do you sense what I sense? And that is a night scene with the light coming across. And yet I have more air and description in mind of what I felt when I remember seeing it than the photograph. To me, I'm not saying this is the way you should do it, but I'm expressing to you how I paint and why I paint the way I do. All of these harsh darks up there, if you recall, are now subdued. The sky has, in this case, the air, the night air, has taken over. It's taken over it. And just, this is the light area that pops up. When I paint and I do my workshops, I hold nothing back. By that I mean, whatever I can show you that I know, I will show you. Also, I use a mirror. In this case, I don't have to because I'm looking at the screen, but I usually use a mirror to see things in reverse. And I see some things, and that's why I mix enough paints. Don't be stingy with your paints. Better to mix more than less, because you'll never be able to mix it again. I'm going back now just to give it a little strength. A little strength here and there, where I think it needs it. And how do I know where it needs it? Well, I just feel it. You paint long enough, you see, I felt that go back and this comes forward. It's just a matter of feeling to a certain degree. I'm just sort of going back and pulling out a few things. It's not finished yet. I have a couple of more little tricks up my sleeve. We have till 9 o'clock. I got to the Whitestone, and then the next bridge that was built in 1961 was the Throgs Neck Bridge. Now, I refer to the Throgs Neck Bridge as a man's bridge. It's short. In other words, it's not very long. It's stout, chunky, strong, and it doesn't look like it's going to fall down like the other bridges. See what I'm just pulling out some darks here, accents. There are two kinds of accents. There's a white accent and a dark accent. Your darkest dark should be the dark accent. The lightest light is your white accent. I'm going to use a few of those here. And when you do accents, don't go crazy. Just a couple. You do a few and say, well, that looks good. And okay, you're going to do more. You're going to do more. And before you know it, you just lost it. Overdoing it is no good. The Throgs Neck Bridge was designed, who else? Haman. The last bridge in New York to have been built is the Verrazano, which opened in 1964, designed by Aman, who at that time was 85 years old. That is the longest, was at that time, the longest bridge in the world. It's more than a mile long. The bridge is so big that when Aman designed it, he took into consideration the curvature of the earth. Yeah, that's how big it is. You know, so that when he put the towers, which are 70 stories tall, if on the curvature of the earth, the towers will slightly fall apart. Well, very minor, but it's an optical illusion. He tilted them in a little bit so they would look straight. Something similar to the Parthenon in Greece. That's Aman said one thing which is very true and very accurate. He said there is no reason, and it's a crime, to build an ugly bridge. Okay, now see, time-wise, we're doing okay. This is where that, see those lights there? That's with the masking fluid. I couldn't paint that. Then I'm going to put some white accents up here with a razor blade. These are the lights. I could use white paint, yes, but see that there and down here. Those are the accents, the white accent. Two accents, light and dark. Your light is light, your dark is dark. That punches your painting up a little bit. It gives it a little more snap. And another little thing. A little opaque paint. And there's nothing wrong with white. People who complain about using white paint in their work, Sargent, great watercolor artist besides a portrait painter, used white. Winslow Homer, another great American painter, used white. White is referred to as body color, which is an English term, meaning they use white paint in their watercolors. And who else? But to me, and that's only my opinion, Turner, probably the greatest oil, well, he did oils, but the greatest watercolor artist. His watercolors at the end of his life look like abstract paintings. I just want to get a little bit of the, the railing. So I'm just practicing. And then when I feel it, I'll put it in. These are just little accents down here. I don't know whether you got that or not. Here, it's a little better now. A little bit down there, which keeps this from becoming flat. I don't see it in the photograph. It's not there, but it is in my head. I was there. I only paint things that I have seen, that I've been to. So that's why I like to travel. I believe, we have more memories in us. Okay. Just a couple of touches. Anyway, let me finish up with the white stone, the Verrazano, that is so big and so beautiful. That there's a story to that. When Armand and Robin Moses, by the way, Robin Moses, as you know, was the master builder of New York. In Bay Ridge, where the bridge was being built, they knocked down about 700 homes. See what I'm doing out here? I'm just giving it a dry brush feeling of a little bit of gradation of color. Just a little bit. So I'm bringing your eye more and more into here, playing with it. Playing with it. Anyway, they knocked down 700, about 500, 800 homes. I'm sorry, I remember 800 homes, and 7,000 people were displaced. There's a story there about a mother-in-law that her son-in-law was one of the designers and engineers on the bridge. All I'm doing now is giving it a little bit of interest. And when he told his mother-in-law that they were going to knock down her house because she was in the path, she was so angry at him that she demanded that he change the plan. Well, he couldn't do anything. And she died, never forgiving him because of that. Now, we may have time, but we may not. What I would do one more time is I would do another glaze, but this is not dry yet. I would start the other glaze. Remember, I started the second glaze from here and I went down? Well, I would take the painting, I would turn it upside down. I started the second glaze here. Sorry, this way is probably better. I started the second glaze here and I came down. I would take the next glaze and I start here and work down, which means here I have one layer. Here down, I have 2 layers. Here down, I have 3 layers. So what I'm doing is I'm building up air, space, and giving the painting a feeling of 3-dimensional environment. I don't know whether if I hold it to the light a little bit more, the light will shine on it. If you can see it, and I think that was the vision that I had in mind of creating this glow and nighttime feeling of the bridge. That was my vision. And everything I did, I tried to focus and stay focused on the subject. Are there any questions? We're running out of time. Okay.
Yeah, nothing so far.
Okay.
Oh, wait.
Either they're not there or I did a good job.
Yeah, there's been a few comments about how the demo is. Can you repeat the name of the book you mentioned?
Carlson, Frank P. Carlson, Outdoor Painting.
Where do you have a workshop or paint in Montauk?
No, I don't do any workshops in the summer. That's my time off to paint and do my plein air for myself. I have workshops the rest of the year, some on Long Island, some in Florida, Arizona, different parts of the country, North Carolina. Supposedly, this ship's supposed to go back to try to go to Italy, but I only do workshops. If you're interested, just go to my website. Or I was talking to the flower field, and they may do a workshop with me in January or February this year on Long Island.
Okay, so why do you wear a glove?
I wear gloves in the winter because my fingers get dried and they chap. The water, too much water. Fingers, they crack, and I hate that. So that's why I wear gloves in the winter. Anytime it gets cold, let's put it that way.
Okay, I think that's pretty much it. All the comments are saying wonderful. Thank you for your demo. Inspiration. All right.
Well, I hope they liked it. And try again. The point of today's demo was the glaze. The power of glaze is not for me to just do a nice painting. I want them to get an understanding that every time you paint, have a reason for painting and what you're trying to do, and stay focused.
Okay. Any white glazes?
Yes, that's a scumble. I've certain paintings that I've done, I've used the white, I've used the red, I've used the green, I've used the orange. It depends on the effect. Remember, glazes have the power of color. A warm color will give you a warm glaze. A cool color will give you a cool glaze. White is a cool color. It'll make the painting flatter and cooler. Yes, I've used white as a glaze. I've used actually most of the colors, depending on the effect that I want to create.
All right. That's pretty much it.
Okay, then thank you all.
For coming.
And thank you for all for coming, and I hope you got something out of it. Take care.